Hi everybody! We're back to Owls in the Family, Chapter 3. The next week seemed awfully long. The only time I really hated school was during the springtime, particularly in May, when the birds were busy nesting on the prairies. This May week, what with thinking about the owls and sitting by the open window sniffing the smells of springtime, I wish school had never been invented. Every recess and after school, Marie and Bruce and I talked about the young owls and tried to think of ways to get them out of their nest. Marie suggested we should cut down the tree, but that was too dangerous because the young owls might be hurt. Bruce said he might get his father to come and shoot the old owl, so it would be safe for us to climb the tree. But that wasn't fair. The only thing I could think of was firecrackers. Oh my goodness, everybody. This is such a long time ago this was written. Do you guys play with firecrackers? Don't think so. My idea was to get some of those small skyrockets and let them off under the nest to scare the mother owl away. The trouble was that we had no money, and anyways, the storekeepers wouldn't sell skyrockets to someone our age. Then on Friday night, we had a storm of the kind called a chinook. Chinook, that's probably a word you don't know. And it's kind of a warm breeze. You guys could look it up. Chinooks come down out of the Rocky Mountains in Alberta, and sometimes they blow right across Saskatchewan. They blow like a fury. Lying in my bed on Friday night, I could hear branches snapping off the poplar trees along the riverbank. The rain was pelting on my roof so hard that it scared Mutt, who always slept on my bed, and made him howl. I had to pull the quilt over his head to make him keep quiet. He hated storms. I worried about the young owls for a long time before I finally fell asleep. Early on Saturday morning, Marie called me and we met Bruce at the railroad bridge. It was a fine morning and the sun kept popping in and out between the white clouds that were racing across the sky, trying to catch up with the Chinook. Everything was streaming from all the rain and the prairie was soggy wet. We hurried across the fields and didn't care if our feet got soaked because we were worried about the owls. When we were still quite a way from the owl bluff, Bruce gave a shout. "Lookee!" he yelled. "Old Miller's blind is gone!" Now don't forget, the blind is like a camouflage bit of wood and twigs that Mr. Miller set up to hide behind so he could spy on the owls. Sure enough, 6 or 7 of the biggest cottonwoods were snapped right off at the tops, and as for Mr. Miller's blind, it had been blown clean out of the tree as if nobody ever did find it again. But the worst thing was the owl's nest. The rain and wind had smashed it to pieces, and all that was left was a stick or two stuck in the crotch where the nest had been. There was no sign of the old owls at all, but on the ground near the foot of the tree were 2 young owls. And they were cold and dead. They were so young they had only grown about half of their feathers, and baby down was still sticking to them all over. I don't know whether they were killed by the fall or not, but they were as wet as sponges, and I think they probably died from being so wet and cold all night long. We felt as miserable as could be, and all we could think of was to have a little funeral for the owls. Bruce had his jackknife with him, and he started to dig a grave while Murray and I went looking for the right kind of sticks to use for crosses. There was a big pile of brush nearby, and I happened to give a kick in passing, and something went snap, snap, snap under it. I shoved my hand under the brush and touched a bundle of wet feathers. Murray and Bruce came over, and we pulled the brush away, and there was the missing owlet. The 3rd one that had been in the nest. And he was still alive. He was bigger than the other 2. It was probably because he was the first one hatched. Horned owls are funny that way. They begin to lay their eggs in March, when it's still winter on the prairie. The eggs are laid a few days apart, but from the time the first one is laid, the mother has to start setting. If she waited until she had a full clutch of eggs, notice the vocabulary, clutch of eggs, and setting. Now I lost my spot. Sorry, guys. If she waited until she had a full clutch of eggs, the early ones would be chilled and would never hatch. The first egg that's laid hatches first, and the young owl gets a 4 or 5 day head start than the next one, who in turn gets a head start from the next one. The one we found must have been the first to hatch, because he was not only bigger than the others, but must have been a lot stronger too. When the nest blew apart and he fell to the ground, he was able to wiggle under the brush pile for shelter, and that probably saved his life. He was about as big as a chicken. And you could see his grown-up feathers pushing through the baby down. He even had the beginnings of the 2 horn feathers growing on his head. A surprising thing about him was that he was almost pure white, with only small black markings on the end of his feathers. When we found him, he looked completely miserable because all of his down feathers were stuck together in clumps, and he was shivering like a leaf. I thought he would be too miserable to feel like fighting. But when I tried to pick him up, he hunched forward, spread his wings, and hissed at me. It was a good try, but he was too weak to keep it up, and he fell right over onto his face. I was still a little bit afraid of him because his claws were long and sharp, and his beak, which he kept snapping, seemed big enough to bite off my finger. But he did look so wet and sad, and after a while I stopped being afraid. I got down on my knees in front of him and very slowly put my hand on his back. He hunched down as if he thought I was going to hurt him. But when I didn't hurt, he stopped hissing and laid still. He felt as cold as ice. I took off my shirt to put over him, and then I picked him up as carefully as I could and carried him out of the bluff so he could sit in the sunshine and get dry and warm again. It was surprising how fast he started to get better. In half an hour his feathers were dry and he was standing up and looking around him. Murray had brought along some roast beef sandwiches for lunch. He took some meat out of the sandwiches and held it out to the owl. The owl looked at him for a minute, with its head on one side, then gave it a funny little hop and came close enough to snatch the meat right out of Murray's fingers. It gave a couple of gulps, blinked its eyes once, and the meat was gone. Did you know that owls ate meat? He was certainly a hungry owl. He ate all the meat we had, and most of the bread as well. When I found some dead mice that his mother must have left on the edge of the nest, and which he had also been blown to the ground, the owl ate them too. They must have been hard to swallow, because he ate them whole. But he got them down somehow. After that, we were friends. When Bruce and I started to walk away from him, just to see what he would do, the owl followed right along behind us like a dog. He couldn't fly, of course, but he couldn't walk any too well either. He kind of jumped along, but he stayed right with us all the same. I think he knew he was an orphan, and that if he stayed with us, we'd look after him. Boys and girls, do you know what the word orphan means? It means when the parents are gone. So this little owl is an orphan. When I sat down again, he came up beside me, and after taking a sideways look into my face, he hopped up on my leg. I was afraid his claws would go right through my skin, but they didn't hurt at all. He was being very careful. "Guess he's your owl, all right," Bruce said, and I could see he was a little jealous. "No, sir, Bruce," I replied. "He can live at my